The Papal Basilica of St. Francis of Assisi is the mother church of the Roman Catholic Order of Friars Minor, commonly known as the Franciscan Order, in Assisi, a town of Umbria region in central Italy, where St. Francis was born and died. The basilica is one of the most important places of Christian pilgrimage in Italy, with its accompanying friary, Sacro Convento. The basilica is a distinctive landmark to those approaching Assisi. It has been a UNESCO World Heritage Site since 2000. The basilica, which was begun in 1228, is built into the side of a hill and comprises two churches known as the Upper Church and the Lower Church, and a crypt where the remains of the saint are interred. The interior of the Upper Church is an important early example of the Gothic style in Italy. The upper and lower churches are decorated with frescoes by numerous late medieval painters from the Roman and Tuscan schools, and include works by Cimabue, Giotto, Simone Martini, Pietro Lorenzetti and possibly Pietro Cavallini. The range and quality of the works gives the basilica a unique importance in demonstrating the development of Italian art of this period. History. The Franciscan friary and the lower and upper basilicas of Francis of Assisi were begun in honor of this local saint, immediately after his canonization in 1228. Simone di Putrello donated the land for the church, a hill at the west side of Assisi, known as Hill of Hell, where previously criminals were put to death. Today, this hill is called Hill of Paradise. On the 16th of July 1228, Francis was canonized by Pope Gregory IX in Assisi, and he laid the foundation stone of the new church the following day. Although construction may already have been begun, the construction having been begun at his order, the Pope declared the church to be the property of the papacy. The church was designed by Maestro Jacopo Tedesco, who was in those days the most famous architect. The construction was supervised by Brother Elias of Cortona, one of the first followers of St. Francis and the former Vicar General of the Order under St. Francis. The lower basilica was finished in 1230. On Pentecost, the 25th of May 1230, the remains of St. Francis were brought in a solemn procession to the lower basilica from its temporary burial place in the Church of San Giorgio, now the Basilica of St. Clare of Assisi. The burial place was concealed for fear that St. Francis's remains might be stolen and dispersed. The construction of the upper basilica was begun after 1239 and was completed in 1253. Both churches were consecrated by Pope Innocent IV in 1253. Pope Nicholas IV, a former Minister General of the Order of Franciscans, raised the church to the status of papal church in 1288. The Piazza del Loggia, the square leading to the church, is surrounded by colonnades constructed in 1474. They housed the numerous pilgrims flocking to this church. In 1818, the remains of St. Francis were rediscovered beneath the floor of the lower basilica. In the reign of Pope Pius IX, the crypt was built so that the faithful might visit the burial place of the saint. On the 27th of October 1986 and January 2002, Pope John Paul II gathered in Assisi with more than 120 representatives of different religions and Christian denominations for a World Day of Prayer for Peace. On the morning of September 26, 1997, two earthquakes hit that region of Italy in rapid succession, registering 5.5 and 6.1 respectively on the Richter scale. There was widespread devastation and many ancient buildings were destroyed or damaged, while a group of specialists and friars were inspecting the damage to the Basilica of St. Francis. An aftershock shook the building, causing the collapse of the vault. Two Franciscan friars who were among the group and two of the specialists were killed. Much of the cycle of frescoes of the life of St. Francis by Giotto in the upper church of the Basilica were slightly damaged, whereas those of the sections of the vault which collapsed were almost entirely destroyed. The church was closed for 2 years for restoration. Architecture. The church was designed by Maestro Jacopo Tedesco on 2 levels, each of which is consecrated as a church. They are known as the Basilica Superior, generally called the Upper Church, and the Basilica Inferior, generally called the Lower Church. The Lower Church was structurally a large crypt supporting the upper one. In the 19th century, a lower crypt was constructed beneath the basilica. Architecturally, the exterior of the basilica appears united with the friary of St. Francis, since the lofty arcades of the latter support and buttress the church in its apparently precarious position on the hillside. The architecture is a synthesis of the Romanesque and Gothic styles, and established many of the typical characteristics of Italian Gothic architecture. As originally built, both upper and lower churches had a simple cruciform plan with an ashless nave of 4 square bays, a square crossing, a transept that projected by half a bay one each side, and an apse, the lower being semicircular and the upper polygonal. To the left of the church stands a freestanding bell tower of Romanesque design. The lower church was built entirely in the Romanesque style, having a low semicircular ribbed cross vaults over the nave and barrel vaults over the transept arms. However, the space has been greatly extended with a number of lateral and transept chapels added between 1350 and 1400. The main entrance to the nave is through an ornate Gothic doorway built between 1280 and 1300, and late enclosed with a simple Renaissance-style porch of 1487 by Francesco di Bartolomeo da Pietrasanta. Set in the tympanum of the Gothic doorway is an ornate rose window which has been called the eye of the most beautiful church in the world. The upper church has a facade of whitewashed brick divided into 2 horizontal zones of about equal height, and with a simple gable of height equal to the lower zones. There is a single large doorway in the Gothic style, divided by column and with a rose window set in the tympanum above the 2 cusped arches. Above the door, in the second zone, is a large and ornate rose window in which most of the decorative details are Romanesque in style. Surrounding it are carved the symbols of the 4 evangelists, combining with the window to create a square composition. Above it in the gable is an ocular window, to the left of the facade and visible from both the forecourts of the upper church and the lower church is the Benediction loggia in the Baroque style, which was built in 1754, when the church was raised to the status of basilica. Internally, the upper church maintains Brother Elia's original simple aisleless cruciform plan. Like the lower church, there is a nave of 4 bays with ribbed cross vaulting. Unlike that of the lower church, it is only the diagonal ribs which are of semicircular form. The transverse ribs are pointed in the Gothic manner, and thus rise to the full height of the wider diagonal ribs. Each group of ribs springs from a group of clustered columns. Externally, the columns and vault are supported by stout buttresses of semicircular plan. Unlike the lower church, the transepts also have ribbed vaulting. There are tall Gothic windows with geometric tracery in each bay of the nave and in the polygonal apse of the chancel. The windows of the apse are believed to have been created by German craftsmen active around Assisi at the end of the 13th century. The windows on the left-hand side of the nave were made by a French workshop, while those on the right-hand side are attributed to the workshop of Maestro di San Francesco. These stained glass windows are among the best examples of 13th-century Italian glasswork. As is characteristic of Italian church architecture, the main decorative feature, and the main medium used for conveying the church's message is fresco, rather than stained glass. The earliest frescoes are some of those in the lower church. The work proceeded with a number of different projects and appears to have involved numerous artists, some of whom are as renowned as Cimabue and Giotto, but many of whom are no longer known by name. Upper Basilica. This bright and spacious basilica consists of a single four-bay nave with cross-vaulted ceiling bordered with patterns of crosses and leaves, a transept and a polygonal apse. The four-ribbed vaults are decorated alternately with golden stars on a blue background and paintings. The second vault is decorated with roundels with busts of Christ facing St. Francis and the Virgin facing St. John the Baptist. The entrance vault gives us the four Latin doctors of the Church, St. Gregory facing St. Jerome and St. Ambrose facing St. Augustine. These are ascribed to the Isaac Master. The choir has 102 wooden stalls with carvings and marquetry by Domenico Indovini. In the center, on a raised platform, stands the Papal Cathedral. The west end of the transept and the apse have been decorated with many frescoes by Cimabue and his workshop. The magnificent crucifixion, with St. Francis on his knees at the foot of the cross, stresses again the veneration of the Passion of Christ by St. Francis. Sadly, the frescoes of Cimabue soon suffered from damp and decay, due to the use of lead oxide in his colors and to the fact that the colors were applied when the plaster was no longer fresh. They have deteriorated and have been reduced to photographic negatives. Prior to him there had been some decorations in the upper right-hand section of the transept by a northern master, probably an English artist. He realized the two lunettes and the roundels on the west wall with paintings of the angel and the apostles. Another master, the Roman master, painted the Isaiah and the David and the remainder of the wall under the eastern lunette. The upper part on both sides of the nave, badly damaged by the earthquake of 1997, was decorated in 2 rows with in total 32 scenes from the Old Testament and the New Testament, while the upper register of the entrance wall is covered with 2 frescoes, Pentecost and Ascension of Jesus. Since it took about 6 months to paint one bay of the nave, different Roman and Tuscan masters, followers of Cimabue, have performed this series of scenes such as Giacomo Jacopo Torretti and Pietro Cavallini. The 2 frescoes of the life of Isaac in the middle register of the third bay are traditionally ascribed to the young Giotto, but even this has been controversial. Many critics esteem these the work of the anonymous Isaac Master and his workshop, deducing from stylistic details attesting to his Roman background. Some think that the Isaac Master may have been Pietro Cavallini or a follower. Pietro Cavallini had painted around 1290 a similar fresco, Isaac blessing Jacob, in the convent of the church Santa Cecilia in Trastevere in Rome. The position of the resting Isaac looks like the same position of the Virgin in Cavallini's mosaic Birth of the Virgin in the apse of the church Santa Maria in Trastevere in Rome. The Isaac Master is considered one of the first practitioners of the true fresco technique, which revolutionized mural painting for the subsequent centuries. But the most important decorations of the series of 28 frescoes ascribed to the young Giotto along the lower part of the nave. Each bay contains 3 frescoes above the dado in each side of the nave, 2 frescoes in the east galleries beside the entrance, and 2 more on the entrance wall. Giotto used the Legenda, the biography of St. Francis by St. Bonaventure, to reconstruct the major events in the life of St. Francis. The prototype for this cycle may have been the St. Francis cycle by Pietro Cavallini in the church San Francesco a Ripa in Rome. The paintings are as vivid as if Giotto had been a witness to these events. According to Vasari, they were executed in the period between 1296 and 1304. However, the authorship of Giotto is disputed, due to the ambiguous attributions given in early descriptions of this work. Many Italian critics continue to support the authorship of Giotto and his workshop, but because of small differences in style with the frescoes of Isaac, it is thought that several or even all of these frescoes were painted by at least 3 separate painters, using the original concept of Giotto, the master of legend of St. Francis, the master of the obsequies of St. Francis, and the Cecilia master. The first span of the ceiling is decorated with frescoes of the 4 doctors of the church, attributed either to a young Giotto or to one of his followers. The third span presents 4 heart-shaped medallions of the Christ, Mary, John the Baptist and Francis, painted by Jacopo Torretti. The Cuspid facade of the upper basilica has a portal in Gothic style with twin doors and a beautiful rose window. Lower Basilica. Brother Elias had designed the lower basilica as an enormous crypt with ribbed vaults. He had acquired his experience by building huge sepulchres out of hard rock in Syria. The doors are surmounted by a large rose window, flanked by 2 smaller ones, called the Eye of the most beautiful church in the world. The decorations on the left wooden or were executed by Aglinuccio da Gubbio, and those on the right or by an anonymous Umbrian artist. They portray stories from the lives of St. Francis, St. Clare, St. Louis and St. Anthony. On the left wall of the porch stands the bust of Pope Benedict XIV, who granted this church the title of Patriarchal Basilica and Cappella Papale. Pope Benedict XVI's a theological act in 2006 of renouncing the title of Patriarch of the West has had the consequence of the basilica changing its name to that of the Papal Basilica of St. Francis. Entering the lower basilica, one sees at the other side of the vestibule the chapel of St. Catherine of Alexandria, erected about 1270. It was enlarged by Gattapone da Gubbio and decorated at the expense of Cardinal Egidio Albornoz, papal legate in charge of the Papal States. He was initially buried here, but his body was later transferred to Toledo, Spain. The frescoes with the 8 episodes from the life of St. Catherine were painted in 1368 to 1369 by Andreas Pictor da Bologna. This painter, called Andrea, is most probably Andrea da Bartoli, the court artist of Albornoz. The saints in this chapel were painted by Pace di Bartolo d'Assisi. The stained glass windows of the work of Giovanni di Bonino of Assisi. On the left side of the entrance is the small chapel of St. Sebastian with a canvas by Giorgetti and episodes of the life of the saint on the walls painted c. 1646 by G. Martelli. The left wall of this chapel is decorated by some paintings by Ottaviano Nelli and a painting of St. Christopher. On the right side of the entrance there are 2 monuments by anonymous artists. In the first span, the mausoleum of Giovanni da Cerchi, surmounted by an early 14th century porphyry vase, and the mausoleum of John of Brienne, King of Jerusalem and Emperor Regent of Constantinople. Above this last burial monument stands a statue of the Blessed Virgin, and on its left the figure of a crowned woman seated on a lion, made by Cosmatesco. The badly deteriorating frescoes on the walls and the vaults of the 3rd section of this entrance are the work of Cesare Somei and G. Martelli. The chapel on the right side of the 3rd section is dedicated to St. Anthony the Abbot. The niches in the wall contain the burial monuments of the governor of Spoleto Blasco Fernandez and his son Garcia, both assassinated in 1367. The lower basilica consists of a central nave with several side chapels with semicircular arches. The nave is decorated with the oldest frescoes in the church by an unknown artist, called Maestro di San Francesco. They feature 5 scenes from the Passion of Christ on the right side, while on the left side equally 5 scenes from the life of St. Francis. By this juxtaposition, the Franciscans wanted to contribute to the idea of the founder as a second Christ. They are connected by a low blue painted ceiling decorated with golden stars. Most images on the lower walls have decayed to leave almost no trace, except on the right wall fragments of Virgin and Child with an Angel by Cimabue. These frescoes, executed in tempera on dry plaster, were completed about 1260 to 1263. They are considered by many as the best examples of Tuscan wall paintings prior to Cimabue. As the popularity of this church increased, side chapels for noble families were added between 1270 and 1350, destroying the frescoes on the opened walls. The first chapel on the left is the San Martino chapel, dedicated to St. Martin of Tours. It was built by the Franciscan Cardinal Gentile Martino da Montefiore and was decorated between 1317 and 1319, with 10 frescoes depicting the saint's life by Simone Martini. This dedication most likely referred to the cardinal's position as cardinal priest of the Basilica of St. Martin I Monte in Rome, and was intended to be his burial place. It was probably incomplete at the time of Montefiore's death, thus he was interred in the neighboring chapel of St. Louis. Martini also painted a triptych depicting the Madonna and Child with 2 Hungarian royal saints with a row of 5 attendant saints in the St. Elizabeth Chapel. These are among the greatest Martini's works and the finest examples of 14th-century painting. Over time, however, his use of lead paint has led to the darkening of several sections of these works. The other chapel on the left is dedicated to St. Peter of Alcantara. The chapels on the right are dedicated to Saints Louis of Toulouse and Stephen I of Hungary, with frescoes by Dono Doni and stained glass attributed to Simone Martini. Anthony of Padua, with frescoes by Cesare Cerme. Mary Magdalene. This chapel, built by Teobaldo Pontano, contains some of the best works of the workshop of Giotto and maybe by the master himself. On the lateral walls are scenes from the life of Mary Magdalene, while in the vault there are roundels with busts of Christ, the Virgin, Mary Magdalene and Lazarus. The nave ends in a richly decorated semicircular apse, preceded with a transept with barrel vaulting. The frescoes in the right transept depict the childhood of Christ, partly by Giotto in his workshop, and the Nativity by the anonymous Maestro di San Nicola. The lowest level shows 3 frescoes representing St. Francis posthumously intervening in favor of 2 children. These frescoes by Giotto were revolutionary in the time, showing real people with emotions set in a realistic landscape. On the transept wall, Cimabue painted an image of Our Lady enthroned and St. Francis. This is probably the nearest likeness existing, showing the actual appearance of St. Francis. This static painting in Gothic style is in stark contrast with the lively frescoes of Giotto. This chapel of St. Nicholas of Bari, at the northern end of the transept, was commissioned by the papal legate Cardinal Napoleone Orsini, and it contains the tomb of the cardinal's brother, Giovanni Orsini, who died between 1292 and 1294. The funerary monument is set in a niche above the altar, with the recumbent effigy of a young man placed inside a mortuary chamber and flanked by 2 angels. The reliefs were carved by an Umbrian sculptor, probably of local origin. Between the tomb and the stained glass window appears a fresco triptych attributed to Giotto's school, representing the Madonna and Child with St. Francis and Nicholas. The cycle decorating the walls of the chapel, completed by 1307, comprises 12 scenes painted on the ceiling and on the walls illustrating the life and miracles of St. Nicholas, a scene of the chapel's dedication is painted above the arch of the entrance on the southern wall. The Redeemer received the homage of Giovanni Orsini, presented by St. Nicholas, and of Napoleone Orsini, presented by St. Francis. The stained glass windows show Cardinal Napoleone presented to Christ in the summit and his brother presented to St. Nicholas in the zone below. At the southern end of the transept, Cardinal Orsini commissioned another chapel, dedicated to St. John the Baptist, which was probably originally built for the tomb of Napoleone Orsini himself, but the cardinal was never buried there and the tomb remained empty. The parallel architectural arrangement of both Orsini chapels suggests that they were conceived together. However, the decorations of the chapel dedicated to St. John the Baptist were never finished. Pietro Lorenzetti executed a fresco triptych with a Madonna and Child with Saints John the Baptist and Francis. The left transept was decorated by the Sienese painter Pietro Lorenzetti in his workshop between 1315 and 1330 to Giotto and Puccio Capanna. This cycle of tempera frescoes are his masterworks. They depict 6 scenes from the Passion of Christ. The fresco of Deposition of the Cross is especially emotional. There were about 330 work stages needed to complete this cycle. Beneath the monumental crucifixion scene, Pietro Lorenzetti has executed a fresco of the Madonna and Child, accompanied by Saints John the Evangelist and St. Francis. The fresco is accompanied by a frescoed niche containing the liturgical implements and a fictive bench. The juxtaposition of the childhood and the Passion frescoes emphasizes the parallel between the Passion of Christ and the Compassion of St. Francis. The papal altar in the apse was made out of one block of stone from Como in 1230. Around the altar are a series of ornamented Gothic arches, supported by columns in different styles. The fine Gothic walnut choir stalls were completed in 1471 by Apollonio Petrocchi da Ripetranzone, with the help of Tommaso di Antonio Fiorentino and Andrea da Montefalco, once featuring frescoes depicting an allegory of the crucifixion by Stefano Fiorentino. The walls of the apse are now covered with a Last Judgment by Cesare Somei or Vieto. The paintings in the lunettes of the vaults depict the triumph of St. Francis and 3 allegories of obedience, poverty and chastity by the so-called Maestro del Vel, a pupil of Giotto. The stained glass windows in this lower basilica are attributed to Giovanni di Bonino and his workshop. Crypt. Halfway down the nave one can descend into the crypt via a double stairway. This burial place of St. Francis was found in 1818. His remains had been hidden by Brother Elias to prevent the spread of his relics in medieval Europe. By order of Pope Pius IX, a crypt was built under the lower basilica. It was designed by Pasquale Belli with precious marble in neoclassical style, but it was redesigned in bare stone in neo-Romanesque style by Ugutarci between 1925 and 1932. The ancient stone coffin with iron ties is enshrined in an open space above the altar. In 1934 his most faithful brothers were entombed in the corners of the wall around the altar. Brother Rufino, Brother Angelo, Brother Matteo and Brother Leo. At the entrance of the crypt, an urn with the remains of Jacopo dei Settisoli was added to the crypt. This woman of Roman nobility, affectionately referred to as Brother Jacoba, was the most faithful friend and benefactress of St. Francis. She was at his side in the Portiuncula at the hour of his death. Friary of St. Francis. Next to the basilica stands the Friary Sacro Convento with its imposing walls with 53 Romanesque arches and powerful buttresses supporting the whole complex. It towers over the valley below, giving the impression of a fortress. It was built with pink and white stone from Mount Subisio. It was already inhabited by the friars in 1230. But construction took a long time, with his result different styles intermingling, Romanesque with Gothic style. A major part was built under the reign of Pope Sixtus IV, a Franciscan, between 1474 and 1476. The friary now houses a vast library, a museum with works of art donated by pilgrims through the centuries, and also the 57 works of art of the Perkins collection. The belfry, in Romanesque style, was finished in 1239. Other burials: Giovanna of Italy, John of Brienne,